There are moments in history when time itself seems to slow down, when the world holds its breath without fully understanding why, and when quiet signals ripple beneath the surface of global events like tremors before an earthquake. We are entering such a moment now. March 14th, 15th, and 16th are not merely dates on a calendar. They sit at a crossroads of economic tension, technological acceleration, and spiritual awakening that many people feel but cannot yet explain. Across the world, financial systems are shifting in ways economists struggle to fully predict. Entire industries are being restructured by artificial intelligence, and millions of people sense that the ground beneath the old order is quietly cracking. Jobs that once promised stability are vanishing. Corporations are restructuring faster than ever before, and governments are navigating debt levels that echo some of the most fragile periods in modern economic history. Yet beneath the noise of stock markets, news headlines, and political arguments, there is a deeper narrative unfolding, one that history has whispered before. In ancient times, moments of global uncertainty often became the training ground for unexpected leaders. Scripture records that long before Joseph stood in Pharaoh's palace interpreting dreams and saving nations from famine, he first walked through betrayal, isolation, and confusion that made no sense at the time. The pit came before the palace, the prison before the promotion, and the silence before the revelation. And if you are listening closely right now, you may sense that the same pattern is repeating in our generation. Because when the world enters a season of shaking, it is not only systems that are being tested, it is people who are being prepared. For many watching this moment unfold, the last few years have felt strangely personal, as though life itself has been rearranging the pieces on a chessboard without explaining the strategy. Careers that once felt secure suddenly shifted direction. Relationships changed. Doors closed without warning, and plans that once seemed clear became surrounded by uncertainty. At the same time, technology advanced at a speed few predicted, with artificial intelligence reshaping the nature of work, creativity, and even human identity. Entire sectors are being automated, while new opportunities quietly appear for those willing to adapt, learn, and lead in unfamiliar territory. Economists speak about inflation, debt cycles, and global supply chains, but beneath those technical terms lies a deeper transformation in how the world functions. We are living through a transition where the structures that defined the last 50 years are gradually giving way to something new. And history shows that during such transitions, the individuals who rise to lead are rarely the ones who felt comfortable during the preparation season. Joseph did not feel powerful when his brothers sold him into slavery, and he certainly did not feel destined for influence while sitting in an Egyptian prison cell. Yet every stage of that painful journey was quietly equipping him with wisdom, patience, and spiritual insight that the palace itself could not teach. What looked like delay was actually development. What looked like rejection was actually redirection. And what looked like isolation was the hidden classroom, where leadership was being formed. Now consider the strange alignment of global signals emerging right now as these mid-March days approach. Financial analysts are watching markets fluctuate with unusual sensitivity as central banks wrestle with inflation and debt pressures that have been building quietly for years. Technology leaders are racing to deploy new generations of AI systems that promise efficiency, but also threaten to displace millions of traditional jobs. Governments across continents are adjusting policies to respond to shifting alliances, rising economic competition, and growing public frustration with institutions that no longer feel trustworthy. Yet while headlines focus on numbers, algorithms, and political debates, something deeper is happening in the lives of individuals who feel called to something greater. Many people watching this moment feel an unexplainable sense that their life story has been moving toward a turning point, as though the confusion of recent years was not random but preparatory. This is the paradox of divine preparation. When God is shaping leaders, the training rarely looks like promotion at first. It looks like pressure, pruning, and patience. The pit Joseph experienced was not a mistake in the story. It was the beginning of the strategy that would eventually position him to preserve entire nations during famine. And if history teaches us anything, it is that moments of global disruption often coincide with the rise of individuals who were quietly being prepared long before the crisis arrived. Across the African diaspora and far beyond it, there is a growing awakening among people who sense that their identity carries a deeper purpose than the world has allowed them to believe. For generations, narratives of limitation attempted to define who could lead, who could innovate, and who could shape the future of nations. Yet the pattern of Scripture consistently reveals that God often selects leaders from places the world overlooks. David was a shepherd before he was a king. Moses was a fugitive before he confronted Pharaoh. And Joseph was a prisoner before he became the architect of Egypt's survival strategy. The world measures leadership through titles, influence, and visibility, but divine preparation focuses on character, endurance, and spiritual perception. When systems begin to shake, those inner qualities suddenly become more valuable than credentials alone. And that is why seasons of uncertainty can actually be the birthplace of extraordinary purpose. The global economy may be shifting, industries may be restructuring, and technologies may be rewriting the rules of productivity. But within that turbulence lies a hidden opportunity for those who have been developing resilience in silence. What if the struggles you faced over the past few years were not interruptions to your destiny, but the very training required for what comes next? What if the confusion you experienced was the same kind of fog Joseph walked through before clarity arrived? So as these critical days unfold, the deeper question is not simply what will happen in markets, governments, or technology sectors, but what is happening within you. Because history shows that when systems reach moments of tension, individuals who have endured the refining process begin to step into roles they never imagined. The palace doors Joseph eventually walked through were not opened by his ambition. They were opened by preparation that aligned perfectly with the needs of the moment. And today the world is once again entering a period where wisdom, discernment, and spiritual courage will matter more than ever before. The same global instability that frightens some people will create unprecedented opportunities for others who are ready to think differently, lead with integrity, and recognize patterns others ignore. Difficult seasons are rarely comfortable, but they are often the birthplace of calling. So if your journey has included pits, prisons, disappointments, or delays that made no sense at the time, you may be closer to your purpose than you realize. Because when the world begins to shake, it is often the signal that those who were hidden in preparation are about to be revealed. And the next part of this story may explain why these particular days carry a significance that few people yet understand. If you step back from the daily noise of headlines and look at the long rhythm of history, you begin to notice that civilizations often move in cycles that feel almost prophetic in their timing. Economic expansions give way to corrections. Political confidence slowly transforms into instability. And technological breakthroughs arrive at the exact moment old systems begin losing their strength. Right now, the world stands at one of those intersections where multiple cycles are converging at once. And that convergence is why these days in mid-March carry such unusual weight. Global debt has reached levels that economists once considered unimaginable. Entire labor markets are being redefined by automation and artificial intelligence. And the geopolitical order that dominated the last several decades is quietly shifting as nations compete for influence, resources, and technological supremacy. Yet the deeper truth hidden beneath these events is that disruption has always been the environment where unexpected leaders emerge. When Egypt faced the threat of famine in the ancient world, the solution did not come from the most obvious place within the palace walls. It came from a man who had spent years in obscurity learning lessons he did not yet understand. Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream not merely because he possessed intelligence, but because his journey through betrayal, hardship, and patience had sharpened his ability to see patterns others could not see. And if you look carefully at our present moment, you may realize that the same kind of pattern recognition is becoming essential for those who sense they were born for leadership in a time of transition. Over the past decade, something remarkable has been happening across the global workforce that few commentators fully acknowledge. Millions of people who once trusted traditional career paths are discovering that the rules have changed faster than institutions can explain them. Automation is quietly replacing routine tasks. Artificial intelligence is reshaping industries, from finance to medicine to media, and entire professions that once required decades of training are being augmented by algorithms capable of analyzing information at astonishing speed. On the surface, this transformation creates anxiety, because uncertainty always does. Families wonder about job security. Students question whether their education will remain relevant, and workers across continents sense that the stability they once expected may no longer exist. But beneath that anxiety lies another possibility that mirrors the ancient pattern of Joseph's preparation. When the world shifts, new forms of leadership become necessary, and those leaders are rarely chosen from the comfortable center of the system. They often emerge from people who have experienced disruption personally, individuals who learned adaptability, not from theory, but from survival. Just as Joseph's years in Egypt exposed him to the mechanics of a foreign empire long before he governed its food supply, today's difficult seasons may be training certain people to understand systems from the inside out. The loss of one opportunity may be forcing you to develop skills, perspectives, and resilience that will later become the very tools you use to influence a much larger stage. There is also a spiritual dimension to this moment that many people feel but struggle to articulate. In times when the world appears stable, faith can sometimes become routine, a quiet background element in everyday life. But when uncertainty spreads across economies, governments, and technologies, something deeper awakens inside the human spirit. People begin searching for meaning again, questioning the narratives they once accepted without thought, and listening more carefully for guidance beyond the noise of culture. The Bible repeatedly shows that moments of global tension often coincide with moments of divine communication. Pharaoh's troubling dreams did not appear during Egypt's years of abundance by accident. They arrived as a warning that required interpretation before the crisis unfolded. And the remarkable part of that story is that the interpretation did not come from the most powerful advisors in the empire. It came from a prisoner who had learned to hear God's voice in isolation. That detail matters more than most people realize, because it reveals that preparation for leadership is often happening far away from public recognition. If you have felt isolated, overlooked, or misunderstood during the past few years, it may not mean you were forgotten. It may mean you were being trained to listen more carefully than those who rely only on noise and approval. Across communities throughout the African diaspora, there is a quiet but growing recognition that identity carries both historical weight and future responsibility. Generations endured systems that attempted to limit their potential, reshape their narratives, and convince them that leadership belonged to someone else. Yet history and scripture both reveal that divine purpose frequently emerges from places that the dominant culture overlooks. The resilience, creativity, and spiritual endurance forged through adversity have always been powerful ingredients in the formation of transformative leaders. When Joseph rose to authority in Egypt, he carried with him the memory of betrayal, injustice, and survival, and those experiences shaped the wisdom he used to govern during famine. In the same way, communities that have walked through generations of struggle often develop insight adaptability, and faith that become invaluable during seasons of global transition. The world is entering a period where empathy, resilience, and spiritual discernment may matter more than titles or traditional credentials. And that realization is part of the awakening happening across many communities right now, where people are beginning to understand that their story did not begin with oppression and will not end with limitation. Instead, their journey may have been preparing them to contribute leadership. Precisely, when the world begins searching for solutions it cannot find within its old structures. Look again at the timing of these days, and you may sense why they feel unusually intense for so many people who are spiritually sensitive. Mid-March arrives at a moment when financial markets are recalibrating expectations. Technological breakthroughs are accelerating competition between nations, and social systems are adjusting to pressures that have been building quietly beneath the surface. These shifts do not happen randomly. Throughout history, moments of structural change have acted like doorways between eras, separating what once was from what is about to emerge. And during those doorways, the individuals who were quietly developing courage, faith, and vision suddenly find themselves standing in positions they never anticipated. Joseph did not wake up one morning planning to manage the resources of an empire. He woke up in a prison cell until a single moment connected his preparation to the need of the hour. That is how divine timing often works. Years of hidden preparation can suddenly converge with one opportunity that changes everything. For some people listening right now, the last chapter of your life may have felt confusing precisely because you were being moved into position without understanding the full picture. But history suggests that when seasons begin to shift this dramatically, those who endured the preparation phase are closer to their breakthrough than they realize. And that realization leads to a powerful question that every viewer must confront within their own spirit. What if the instability we are witnessing across the world is not only a warning about systems that are reaching their limits, but also an invitation for prepared individuals to step forward? What if the pressures reshaping economies, technologies, and governments are also revealing the leaders who were refined through adversity? Joseph's story did not end in the prison. It transformed into influence that preserved entire populations from starvation. And the same God who orchestrated the transformation still moves within the unfolding story of humanity today. So, as these days continue to unfold and the atmosphere of uncertainty intensifies, the real issue may not be fear of what is coming, but readiness for the responsibility that follows. Because when divine preparation meets historical opportunity, the people who once felt hidden often become the voices and strategists the world suddenly needs. And the next part of this unfolding story may reveal why the spiritual awakening happening right now is only the beginning of something far greater. There is a reason the atmosphere around this moment feels unusually intense for so many people who are spiritually aware, because history has shown that before major transitions occur, the world often enters a period where the signs become impossible to ignore. You can see it in the markets that swing between optimism and fear as investors try to interpret signals that do not follow familiar patterns. You can see it in the global job market, where entire industries are being restructured by artificial intelligence, forcing millions of workers to question what stability will look like in the future. You can see it in the rising tension between nations competing for technological dominance, economic security, and control over the systems that will define the next generation. But beyond all of that visible movement lies a quieter signal that only those who are spiritually attentive begin to recognize. It is the sense that the world is entering a chapter where hidden preparation is about to intersect with public responsibility. Scripture repeatedly describes moments when God allowed circumstances to tighten around individuals, not to destroy them, but to reveal what had been developing within them all along. when Joseph was finally summoned from prison to stand before Pharaoh. The crisis Egypt faced had already begun to unfold, and the empire suddenly needed wisdom that none of its established advisors could provide. In the same way, the disruptions spreading across our modern world are exposing the limitations of systems that once appeared unshakable. Institutions that dominated the last century are struggling to keep pace with technological acceleration, economic volatility, and cultural transformation. And in that gap between old structures and new realities, space is being created for voices that carry clarity, courage, and spiritual discernment. Consider how rapidly artificial intelligence has moved from an experimental concept to a force that is rewriting the rules of global productivity. Just a few years ago, many people believed that automation would affect only repetitive industrial tasks, leaving creative and analytical professions untouched. Now algorithms can write reports, generate art, analyze legal documents, assist in medical diagnosis, and even produce complex strategies for businesses and governments. Entire sectors are being reimagined as companies search for efficiency in a world where competition is accelerating. For some people, this transformation feels threatening, as though machines are gradually replacing human value. Yet within every major technological shift in history, a parallel opportunity has emerged for those who are able to see beyond the fear and recognize the deeper pattern. The printing press once disrupted traditional institutions of knowledge, yet it also unlocked a global exchange of ideas that reshaped civilization. The Industrial Revolution displaced countless traditional trades, yet it also created entirely new industries that expanded human possibility. Today's AI revolution is another turning point in that long narrative, and it is forcing humanity to reconsider what leadership, creativity, and wisdom truly mean. Machines can process information, but they cannot replace the spiritual insight, ethical courage, and compassionate understanding that define true leadership. And that is why moments of technological disruption often become the stage where individuals, guided by deeper principles, rise to influence the direction of the future. Joseph's story illustrates this principle in a way that feels remarkably relevant to the times we are living in now. When Pharaoh's dreams revealed the coming famine, the crisis required more than administrative efficiency. It required someone who could see beyond the immediate moment and design a strategy for survival that would last through years of uncertainty. Joseph's ability to do that did not appear suddenly on the day he entered the palace. It was formed through years of hardship that forced him to develop patience, resilience, and trust in God, even when circumstances seemed unjust. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and forgotten in prison, he experienced every reason to lose hope. Yet those same experiences shaped a character capable of managing immense responsibility without becoming corrupted by power. That is the hidden purpose of preparation seasons that feel unfair while they are happening. They are refining qualities that cannot be manufactured once influence arrives. And if you look carefully at the journeys of many people who sense a calling in this generation, you will notice a similar pattern unfolding. The last several years have been marked by unexpected trials, sudden changes in direction, and periods where the path forward felt uncertain. But what if those seasons were not evidence of failure? What if they were the spiritual equivalent of Joseph's prison years, where wisdom was being cultivated quietly before the opportunity for leadership appeared? Across the African diaspora and throughout communities around the world, an awakening is growing among individuals who refuse to accept the limited definitions of identity that history once imposed upon them. They are rediscovering spiritual heritage, reclaiming narratives of resilience, and recognizing that adversity often produces a depth of character that comfortable environments rarely create. For centuries, people who carried immense potential were told that their voices would never shape global conversations. Yet the story of Scripture repeatedly demonstrates that God delights in reversing those expectations. The shepherd becomes a king, the exile becomes a deliverer, and the prisoner becomes a governor whose wisdom preserves entire nations. That pattern is not merely ancient history. It is a blueprint that continues appearing whenever societies reach moments of profound transition. And today's global landscape is filled with signals that such a transition is underway. Economic structures are evolving, technological capabilities are expanding, and cultural narratives are being challenged in ways that open space for new leadership to emerge. The individuals who step into that space will not necessarily be the ones who followed the most predictable path. They will be the ones who endured preparation that taught them how to navigate uncertainty with faith and integrity. As March 14th, 15th, and 16th unfold, the significance of these days may not come from a single dramatic headline or visible event. Instead, their importance may lie in the invisible alignment of preparation and opportunity that begins to accelerate around this moment. Sometimes the most critical shifts in history start quietly, like the first movement of gears within a vast machine that has been waiting for the right moment to turn. Joseph did not know that the day he interpreted Pharaoh's dreams would mark the beginning of a transformation that would elevate him from prisoner to prime minister. Yet, when that moment arrived, every lesson from his past suddenly became relevant. The discipline he learned in servitude helped him manage resources wisely. The humility forged through suffering protected him from arrogance when power arrived. The faith developed in isolation allowed him to trust divine guidance when others relied only on calculation. Those qualities turned a former prisoner into the strategist who guided Egypt through one of the most dangerous economic crises of the ancient world. And that brings us to a question that every viewer must consider carefully in this season of global uncertainty. If the world is indeed approaching a period where systems are tested and new leadership becomes necessary, what kind of preparation has been unfolding in your own life? The frustrations, delays, and unexpected detours you experienced may have been shaping skills and perspectives you did not realize you were developing. The moments when doors closed may have redirected you toward paths that align more closely with your purpose. And the spiritual hunger that has been growing inside you may be the very signal that your calling is connected to something larger than personal success alone. Because when God prepares individuals for influence, the process rarely feels comfortable. It feels like refinement, like pressure, like the slow sharpening of a blade that will eventually be used for a purpose greater than itself. The next chapter of this unfolding story may reveal why those who endured the hardest preparation are often the ones entrusted with the greatest responsibility when the world begins searching for answers. As these final moments of the message unfold, the deeper meaning behind this urgent window of time begins to come into focus, and it becomes clear that the true significance of March 14th, 15th, and 16th is not simply about events happening in the external world, but about a shift happening within people who have been quietly prepared for a season like this. Throughout history, the most important turning points rarely announced themselves with clarity beforehand. Instead, they appeared as periods of tension, confusion, and rapid change where the old systems could no longer function the way they once did. Empires reached moments where their strategies stopped working. Economic structures faced pressures they could not easily resolve, and societies began searching for new voices capable of navigating unfamiliar territory. We are watching the early stages of such a moment right now. Global markets continue to wrestle with instability as inflation, debt cycles, and shifting alliances reshape the financial landscape. Artificial intelligence continues expanding into industries that once believed themselves immune to automation, forcing leaders to rethink the meaning of productivity and human value. Political systems across the world are facing growing pressure from populations that no longer trust the promises of the past. Yet beneath all of this visible turbulence lies a quieter development that may prove even more important. Individuals who spent years walking through seasons of preparation are beginning to sense that their time of stepping forward is approaching. Just as Joseph's years of hardship eventually aligned with Egypt's moment of crisis, the preparation many people experienced in silence may now be intersecting with the needs of a changing world. If you think about Joseph's story in its entirety, you realize that every painful chapter of his life carried a hidden purpose that only became visible in hindsight. When he was thrown into the pit by his own brothers, it looked like betrayal without meaning. When he was sold into slavery in Egypt, it looked like the destruction of his future. When he was falsely accused and imprisoned, it appeared as though justice itself had abandoned him. Yet each of those moments placed him in environments where he learned the skills, discipline, and spiritual sensitivity that would later allow him to interpret Pharaoh's dreams and design a strategy that saved entire populations from famine. That is the paradox of divine preparation. The most uncomfortable seasons often contain the most valuable lessons. And if you listen closely to the stories emerging from people around the world right now, you will notice that many of them have walked through remarkably similar experiences over the past decade. Careers shifted unexpectedly, opportunities vanished without explanation, and plans that once felt certain suddenly required complete reinvention. At the time, those changes felt like setbacks, but now a growing number of individuals are beginning to realize that those disruptions forced them to develop resilience, creativity, and faith that might never have emerged in easier circumstances. The very trials that once seemed like obstacles may have been the training ground for a purpose that is only now becoming visible. There is also a deeper spiritual dimension to this moment that cannot be explained through economics or technology alone. Across the world, people are rediscovering a hunger for meaning that goes beyond material success or social recognition. They are asking questions about destiny, identity, and calling that modern culture often tried to suppress. This awakening is particularly powerful among communities that have endured generations of adversity, including many across the African diaspora, whose resilience and faith have carried them through chapters of history that attempted to silence their voices. For centuries, narratives of limitation were imposed upon people whose potential was far greater than the systems surrounding them were willing to acknowledge. Yet Scripture repeatedly reveals that God has a pattern of choosing leaders from places the world overlooks. The shepherd becomes the king, the exile becomes the liberator, and the prisoner becomes the strategist who guides nations through crisis. These reversals are not accidents. They are reminders that divine purpose is not confined by human expectations. And in times when the world enters seasons of upheaval, those who were shaped through endurance often possess the wisdom needed to navigate the storm. Look carefully at the global atmosphere right now, and you will notice that many of the foundations people once trusted are being questioned simultaneously. The stability of traditional employment is being redefined by technological automation. The credibility of institutions is being challenged by populations that no longer feel represented. The geopolitical order that defined the last generation is evolving as new alliances and rivalries reshape the balance of power. For some observers, these developments create fear, because uncertainty always disrupts the comfort of familiarity. But history tells us that such moments also create opportunities for transformation that would never exist during periods of stability. When systems become rigid and complacent, progress slows until disruption forces innovation to emerge. And during those disruptions, individuals who possess courage, vision, and spiritual grounding suddenly become essential. They are the ones capable of interpreting the signs of the times, designing strategies for the future, and guiding communities through uncertainty with integrity rather than fear. Joseph became that kind of leader for Egypt, not because he sought power for himself, but because his preparation aligned with the moment when wisdom was desperately needed. So the message hidden within these critical days is not a call to panic about what the future holds. It is a call to awareness, readiness, and spiritual clarity. The world may indeed be entering a chapter where economic systems shift, technologies accelerate, and global tensions require careful navigation. But within that turbulence lies the possibility that many people who once felt hidden will step forward with insight that others cannot easily see. If you have walked through seasons that forced you to grow stronger, wiser, and more spiritually grounded, those experiences may have been shaping you for responsibilities that extend far beyond your current circumstances. The pit was never Joseph's final destination, and neither was the prison. Both were stages in a journey that eventually positioned him to influence the course of nations. In the same way, the challenges you faced may have been preparing you for opportunities that are only now beginning to appear on the horizon. And as these days pass, and the story of this season continues to unfold, the most important question you can carry forward is not whether the world will change, because change is already underway. The real question is whether you will recognize the purpose behind your preparation when the moment arrives to step into it. Because history is filled with examples of individuals who spent years wondering why their path was so difficult, only to discover later that every step had been guiding them toward a role they could never have imagined at the beginning. The same God who guided Joseph from the pit to the palace is still writing stories today, still preparing leaders in hidden places, and still aligning moments of crisis with moments of calling. So watch carefully, stay spiritually alert, and do not underestimate the significance of the season you are living through. What feels like uncertainty today may one day be remembered as the turning point where preparation met destiny, and where those who were once overlooked began shaping the future in ways the world never expected.